Hello. Yeah, Luke Webster. I see your comment. Who's betting there's no sound? There's sound. Yeah, you hear me? I've got this licked now, honestly. I've got it plugged in. I know it's not hard, but I've got it plugged in. We're all good. What a race. What a great race weekend. I hope you all enjoyed it wherever you were watching. I thoroughly did. I was glued to my seat right until the end. It was one of those races like any live sporting event where we went into the final moments, the final lap, not knowing who was going to win. And in any sporting event, whether it's football, cricket, whatever, you can't ask for more than that. And that's what we got. And it was amazing. And, you know, the result was such a feel-good result, wasn't it? I mean, I was willing on Carlos Sainz from my team, my McLaren boys, to get that victory they've deserved for so long, they've craved for so long. It's been such a long time. I really wanted him to do it. But on the other hand, there's no way I wanted Gasly not to win that race either. So conflicting last lap in terms of emotion, but that's what you need. You need it to drive emotion, and that's what it did. So it was amazing. I loved every moment of it. Hello to you all. Michigan in the States, Sweden, Estonia. Wow, there's sound, says Rene Bruel, you cheeky bunch. 9 p.m. and Elvis is live with sound. Thanks, Andy Lowe. Yeah, thank you to all of you for joining. Left one in Scotland, Jamie in Cambridgeshire, Toronto, Jan Tastea. Hello, Ola from Mexico. Fantastic, amazing, isn't it? Amazing that we're all over the world with this. I just find it incredible. It's brilliant. I love every moment of it. So I heard a lot of you chatting earlier on saying this has become part of your race weekend, this Monday night live stream. I really appreciate that because it has for me. I really enjoy them. Anyway, there's so much to get through tonight. Loads of you have messaged me over last night and today saying, how on earth are you going to fit this into an hour-long stream? Yeah, I don't know, but let's give it a go. If someone could give me a nudge at around 10 o'clock, that would be amazing because I'll definitely just plough on through otherwise. I've picked some questions from you guys that you've been sending in. I appreciate all of those. They're all the sort of obvious ones, I guess, the biggest talking points, but we will dip in and out of the chat and pick up whatever you want to talk about along the way. I want to start with Pierre Gasly and the win and what an incredible moment it was for him after such a up and down kind of year, 18 months probably. He did an incredible job. Yes, he had an awful lot of luck, of course, the way that the strategy played into his hands, but you have to have a bit of luck. And that's what Formula One's been missing. On days when there's a bit of chaos, we still didn't really believe that it wouldn't be one of the top 3 teams that would win this race. And it took utter chaos for it to happen. We'll get into all of that. We're going to get into the red flag, the pit lane closure, the Mercedes kind of mess up of that pit lane closure. We'll get into all of that. We've got some questions on the red flag, the tyre changes for a number of people, but particularly Stroll under the red flag. Valtteri Bottas, his performance, the chaos in qualifying. We've got all of that coming, so keep those comments until we get to that. But let's start with Gasly, because what I actually want to start with when it comes to Pierre Gasly is the talking point of just how good he is right now, how on form he is, and why that might be. And then, of course, the question comes up, that the question's been on everyone's lips today, is he going to get the seat back at the main Red Bull Racing team? And I then posed this question. We'll start with a poll that I carried out today from you guys. I put the question onto the community tab earlier on. Here it is. 3,000 of you have entered that and taken part. What should Red Bull do with their F1 drivers? Should they move Gasly back to Red Bull Racing because he deserves another chance? Should they stick with Alex Albon? And actually, just Gasly's better off at AlphaTauri anyway, or something else. As you can see there, overwhelmingly, 67% of you saying that they should stick with Alex Albon at Red Bull Racing, help him to improve and bring him on form and keep Pierre Gasly where he seems to fit best. But this raises the question about Red Bull Racing and the environment within that garage, because a couple of people messaged me earlier saying, look, if we switch Pierre Gasly into that Red Bull seat now, well, surely that then proves, because he's on top form, that proves whether it's the car or the driver that's at fault at Red Bull. I don't think it does. Apologies whoever sent that through. I didn't manage to screenshot it in time, so I'm sorry. And then I lost it. I don't think it does prove that, because we know how good the Red Bull car is on occasion, because Max Verstappen demonstrates what it can achieve. Alex Albon can't achieve the same at the moment. for whatever reason. So what is that reason? Is it that the car has some particularly unique driving characteristics needed to get the best out of it in terms of the way it produces downforce, perhaps with that extremely high rake on the car? Perhaps some of the chassis dynamics need a certain type of braking or turn-in phase that perhaps Alex just isn't used to and can't quite get his head around. I don't know the answer to that. Or is it more about the environment inside that main Red Bull team that has already seen a couple of other drivers be moved up? And let's face it, they were moved up because they were doing so well at their own team at the time, and then they didn't work out, and they've been dumped back down off the heap. You can think about Daniel Kvyat, who was doing very well, got moved up to Red Bull, got dumped out of Red Bull, and actually improved greatly when he went back to Toro Rosso. Pierre Gasly's done the same. So what does that say about the environment at Red Bull? Is it too harsh? Is it too pressurised? Do you feel on that Red Bull driver program that every race could be your last and therefore you can't settle in and relax and get the best out of yourself? Let's see what you guys think. Marco and Horner confirmed that Albon doesn't have the same parts as Max, says Varun Sabi. Well, on occasions, yeah, he doesn't, and that happens. But I'm pretty certain that that's not the reason that Alex isn't performing to the same level. I think there's got to be something more to it than that. Let me see. Cars are not equal. Okay, so look, if the cars are not equal at Red Bull, are they not equal by the amount that is showing up between their two drivers? I don't think so. When we say the cars are not equal, we're either talking about the way that the two drivers and their engineering teams go about setting up those two cars, or if we're talking about physical components, maybe it's an upgraded front wing, for example, or rear wing or whatever, a new upgrade that may have come to one car before it's got to the other car. There is no way that any team on the grid would deliberately hamper one driver over another to the point that Alex is suffering, because they need Alex all the way up the grid to help the team out. So I don't really buy that one. Red Bull projects themselves as a fun place to be, but they're savages. They are savages. They are savage. They're savage with the decisions they make, and that, I think, is my point, is that if they are that savage, and as a driver you know they can be savage and cutthroat, well, can you ever relax and perform? Max is safe. Max knows he's safe. He doesn't have any of that worry over his shoulders, but if you're a new driver on the conveyor belt, absolutely you are. You can't, any sportsman can't get the best out of themselves unless they're able to relax and feel comfortable. And that's what Red Bull are trying to do right now by giving Alex all the support that they're currently giving him, more than they've perhaps given any other driver in his position. Patrick Dykeman says Gasly should stay and give Red Bull the finger. In fact, a few of you said that in the comments of that poll earlier. Would Pierre Gasly actually be better off outside of the Red Bull program? A little bit like Carlos Sainz has found his feet once he eventually left Red Bull and is now performing at an incredible level with a drive secured at Ferrari, for what that's worth at the moment. But look, he found a way out of Red Bull and he's excelled off the back of that. So maybe that backs up my point that being a second driver at Red Bull is actually worse off, although you might have access to some great equipment. If it doesn't work for you, perhaps you are better off getting out and finding your feet elsewhere. Maybe that's the better way. Gasly's a better driver at AlphaTauri, says Adam Elliott. I 100% agree with you. At least right now he is. He's doing incredibly well, and that's partly, at least, you can see how comfortable he is at that team with his post-race interviews yesterday. How much appreciation he has for them and what they've given him. And I think vice versa, when you hear from Franz Tost, there's a love there between the two. I don't think you necessarily feel that when you get promoted up to Red Bull because you're always looking over your shoulder. Last driver to thrive there was Ricciardo, and they screwed him in favour of Max, says now João Nobrega. That was one of the Red Bull driver program's biggest failings, was losing Daniel Ricciardo, wasn't it? First they lost Sebastian Vettel. They found Max as a kind of replacement, if you like. A very good replacement. But they had a great pairing in Max and Daniel, but they couldn't accommodate the two of them because of the culture, because of the environment within that team. And that's, again, kind of what I'm talking about here. So there we go. Let's see. Max arrived in the middle of the year. He had no pressure. He was 18 years old, says Rian Castamans. That's a pretty good point, but he also arrived on his very first race. he won it in Barcelona, didn't he? He was aggressive. He's got a very different nature. So look, there we go. I think that's Gasly kind of dealt with. We will move it on because there's so much to get through. But I think huge congratulations, massive respect to Pierre for overcoming the adversity that he's overcome and just getting his head down and getting on with it. I really like the guy. I think he's a great driver. He showed that yesterday under immense pressure in the closing stages of that race. And I think he's just a well-liked guy. You saw that by Driver of the Day 2 weeks on the trot. So there we go. Let me see what we've got in terms of questions, because we have got quite a few. This one, in fact, this one was Ashley Butterfield who asked the question that I kind of then put on to the community tab there in the poll. Do you think Gasly in the second Red Bull while he's in form would be the best way to find out what... Oh, that's... Here's that question I said I couldn't find. What an idiot. I did find it. Here it is. Sorry, Ashley. Ashley says, would it be a way to find out if the Red Bull car is at fault or the driver by putting a guy that's on top form in Pierre Gasly in that car right now? And the answer, I've already answered it, but the answer, I don't think that gives us that answer, because I still think it's about the human side of putting that driver in. We know what the Red Bull car can do. We know that's a quick car on occasion. It wasn't this weekend, but we know it has massive potential. It's just finding a driver or two drivers that can unlock that massive potential. So apologies, Ashley, for for not getting to your question sooner. Let's see. I'm going to move it on then. Right, let's move it on to perhaps the biggest talking point of the race, which was, of course, the pit lane closure and everything that ensued from that. The question that I've selected here is from Robert Faber, who says, for the race's sake, I'm really pleased that Hamilton dropped back, but isn't the way that the closed pit lane was communicated to drivers and the teams grossly inadequate? They close it for safety reasons, so why not have lights flash on the steering wheel or the pit wall like with a safety car? And this has been the single biggest question that I have had, or comment that I've had on all of my Instagram and my Twitter over last night and today, all about this. All about lots of people. I got into a huge argument with a guy called Jamie. In fact, I've got a question for him later on. Jamie, if you're watching, we got into a massive, long, strung out Twitter discussion last night, didn't we, about how it seemed really unfair to Lewis Hamilton, the way this played out. So we're going to break it down a little bit. Now, let's think about the first thing. So Magnussen's car pulls over towards the pit lane entry. It was actually just past the beginning of the slip road into the pit lane. It was next to a marshal's post, and lots of you said, why on earth didn't they just reverse that car back through the marshal's post? Which was my first reaction when I saw it. That's what I assumed they were going to do. And that's why I assumed when they threw the safety car, what on earth are they doing? Because it will take 30 seconds to roll that back through the gap. That gap, as Michael Massey has explained today, was simply a marshal post. It wasn't an exit gate for a car. It actually wasn't wide enough. Technically, it probably was just wide enough, but there's all the marshal's equipment and the marshal's post in the middle of that, which means it's not designated as a place on the track where you can roll a car back through. So if we accept that, and we have to accept that, the only other place you can get rid of that car is by rolling it into the pit lane, which is what they decided to do. So if we say that there's, look, David Bigwood said there's a picnic table in the way. It doesn't matter, because the race director sends out a set of race notes to all the teams and to everybody concerned on a Thursday with a very detailed map. I've got an image of it in a moment to show you what I'm talking about, with a very detailed map that everybody gets, and it shows you where the places that a car can be recovered from the circuit into and where are the marshal's posts. They're clearly labelled, they've got an orange band on them. The marshal's posts only have a very narrow orange band. The others have a wider band or two orange bands, I can't remember. So everybody knows these are the rules. You can't, we don't just start changing things up. It may have been a picnic table. It may have been some slightly more complex equipment with wires running through it. There could have been all sorts of stuff, because that is not a designated place you can roll a car through. So we have to accept you can't put a car into that gap. We have to accept that. So then you've got to take it to the pit lane, right? So then that's happening. That's done and dusted. That is happening. The only safe way to do that is to close the pit lane. And then the question comes, should we have had a virtual safety car? Should we have had a safety car? Probably a virtual safety car would have done the job, wouldn't it? Because it slows everybody down. You can still close the pit lane during a virtual safety car in the same way they did with the safety car. You still keep everybody safe, but you maintain the gaps that everybody has built up. In the end, it was all irrelevant because we've got a red flag later, but let's talk through that point as we get to it. So we've got to roll the car into the pit lane. If you're the race director, you have to close the pit lane to make that safe for marshals to do that. Hopefully we can all agree on that. So then it comes to, how is it communicated? And this is what Robert's question talks about. Was it grossly inadequate, the way that the FIA communicated that the pit lane was closed to the teams and to the drivers on the racetrack? And that perhaps is the question that everybody wants to know the answer to here. Should we have been doing things differently? The first thing to say, this is not new. This is not a new rule. It's a very unusual occurrence. And I think the last time it happened was 2016 with Daniel Ricciardo. Beyond that, I don't know when it happened before that. It's a very, very unusual occurrence, which is why, there's no flag for it. There is no particular coloured light all around the circuit, like you have yellow flags or blue flags. And because of that, they don't flash up on the driver's dashboard. Could they? Yes, they could in the future if we want to make a change to that, but that's not how the system works right now. So the way the system does work, and we've got to be clear about this, all of the teams know this. And this is what frustrates me slightly. Let me show you. This is the image. In fact, this is the steward's decision off the back of the investigation that obviously went underway during the race, with Lewis being under investigation for going into the pit lane. So here it is. It says there it was a 10-second stop and go. That's a mandated penalty. There is no room for manoeuvre on that. It's written into the sporting regulations. It wasn't written into the sporting regulations back in 2016 when Daniel Ricciardo had his incident. So that's why that was different. But it is there now. So once you do it, once you break that rule, the stewards have no choice. It's a 10-second stop and go. Whether we agree on that as being too harsh or not, it's in the regulations. The teams are all aware of that. Everybody knows it. The stewards had no choice. Then we move on. The stewards reviewed the video evidence. The pit lane was closed at 15:41:47. Lewis came in at 12 seconds after that. Now, 12 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but in Formula One terms, that's a reasonable amount of time. The pit lane closed message was displayed on the timing page 3, and the pit lane closed lights were displayed on the light panels 16 and 17 at the same time. Now, so page 3 of the timing screens. Now, the first thing to say is that's not to say that you have to start scrolling through the pages to get to page 3 to find that. Every single team has every single page open across all of their prep perch up on the pit wall. Every strategist has it. It's everywhere. It's not like you've got to scroll through. It's not scrolling through the channels to get to page 3. Page 3 is just the page where all of the FIA's notifications come through. So that's just perfectly normal. What happened was, when the FIA threw the safety car, when the race director threw the safety car, Mercedes went all heads down thinking strategy, right, we're going to box, as did everybody, because you saw the entire grid or pit lane come out into the pit lane. Their first reaction, let's get ready for a pit stop because there's a safety car. That's the natural reaction. In focusing on that, which would have been the obvious choice, everybody at Mercedes, bar one guy back in the UK in the strategy room, missed that message pop up on the FIA page 3 notification screen. That was their main failing. Now, on top of what it says in that document, there's also another bit of software that all the teams use for monitoring the cars around the circuit. And on that screen as well, it also flashes up red to say pit lane entry is closed. It has a message saying pit entry closed, and the pit lane on that diagram is also shown in red. They also missed that. So then we go to, so that's a cock-up, right? Because the teams all know this. And those of you who saw my day in the life of a F1 commentator video a while ago, lots of you laughed at me in the comments about spending my Saturday night before the race, which is a massive change to what my Saturday nights used to be years ago. But I was sat there in here reading the sporting regulations over so that I had them all in my head for events like this. And that is exactly what my McLaren training has taught me to do. Leave no stone unturned, so you know the rules inside out. And Mercedes got caught short on this one. That was the bottom line of it. They missed it. So there's that. So then we look at the driver. Now, could Lewis have done anything? You know, should we have had... Sorry, I know you're all chatting in the chat. I will come to you in a moment. I just want to give you my version of events because I've done quite a lot of digging on this today. So in terms of the team, it's a cock-up. That's essentially what it is. They accept it's a cock-up. Yes, it's a very unusual event. And essentially, because it's unusual, they weren't used to having to check for that kind of thing. But there was a car broken down at pit entry. You've got to say they probably should have done. And I'm sure if this ever happens again, they wouldn't miss it next time. But then it comes to the driver. We've got these two light panels on the left-hand side of Parabolica that Lewis couldn't see or didn't see. Same with Antonio Giovinazzi, of course, all this, by the way. But let me show you what Michael Massey, the race director, sends out to every single team. I said he sends out the race notes, race director's notes on a Thursday, normally, Wednesday or Thursday, to every single team. They also form part of the driver's briefing ahead of the weekend too. And in these notes, he sends out a very detailed map of the circuit. I've got it here. That's it there. I've zoomed in on that bit, exit of Parabolica, and you can clearly see, and this is not new, this is every single race we have this. Down in the bottom right hand corner there, pit entry status panels. Those are the two lights that Lewis couldn't see or didn't see. And granted, they are out on the far left-hand side as the driver's coming round, not necessarily in his eye line, but they're also the same panels that would have been used for other things, like safety cars, for example, around the circuit. So those big flashing light panels, a driver is kind of trained to look for. It's just that these ones here, the pit entry status panels, are hardly ever used. And so this document that came out, I'm sure the teams will have seen it, they will have glossed over it, they will have not even paid any attention to the fact that it says pit entry status panels right there. Just before, as we come around the exit of Parabolica, two of them, before we get to the safety car line, long before we get to the pit entry bollard, as you can see right there. So, in that instance, who do you blame for all of this? Now, I'm going to say I don't blame Lewis Hamilton on that one. I think that was very difficult for him to realise or to notice. And even if he'd seen that, by the time he'd have questioned it in his mind, he would have probably already gone into the pit lane entry. For me, the team are the ones to blame on this. And I promise I'll come to your chat. I am coming to it. The team should not have made that mistake. That's a very un-Formula One-like mistake to make. But having said all of that, could we do things differently or better in the future? 100% we could. We could put a flashing light on the driver's dashboard if we want to. We could put more signage around the racetrack, more visible signage if we want to. There are a number of ways. A traffic light system before we get to pit lane entry. Let me know now. I know you already are. Let me know what you think. Let's come to what you're saying on all this, because I think it's a huge talking point. Let me see. Driver has to abort because it's a safety measure. Well, the driver has to abort, but the team shouldn't have called the driver in, is my point. And actually, Mercedes realised, but it was about 4 seconds too late when they realised the pit lane was closed. When they saw that message, they told Lewis. By that point, he was already well into the pit lane by that stage. So there we go. So let me see. When the red flag occurs during a race, everyone can change. Oh, that's a red flag. We'll come to the red flag chat in a moment because that's my next question. I was surprised how many teams got it right on the pit lane closing. Right, Berkst won. That's a good point. So it was only Lewis and it was Antonio Giovinazzi that made this mistake. Now, the first one, Lewis got 12 seconds between, and the other point I should make is the pit lane closure signage and the notification that went to all the teams came at exactly the same moment as the safety car was thrown. So there were simultaneous communication. So as soon as they got that safety car notification, the team went into strategy mode. Right, what do we do for the best strategy? So they had time to make a decision to make a pit stop, which means that if they'd seen the notification, they also had time to say, don't come into the pits because the pit lane's closed. They didn't do that. So how did everyone else do it? Well, they were all probably, I don't know what the gap was from Lewis back, but some way back from Lewis by the time he got to the pit lane entry. So he was the first guy that has to deal with this, and therefore the first team that have to deal with this. Giovinazzi, I mean, he loses even that excuse because he was obviously some way further back and they still made that call. But you notice that every team came out into the pit lane because their first reaction, as I said, is to make the pit stop. And yet then they all realised that it was pit lane closed and they all decided not to do it. So this is a Mercedes cock-up. There is no other way to play this. Perhaps we could change the rules in the future, but the rules are the rules. The Mercedes knew the rules. They were even notified of the rules a few days before the race, and yet they failed to see them. So it's a very un-Mercedes thing to do, but they cocked it up. Clansom says pit lane closure should have been called first. Well, you can't do that, can you? Because they're only closing the pit lane because of bringing the car in through the pit lane entry, which was also the same thing that necessitated the safety car. So you have to do both at the same time. There is no time to differentiate between the two. Let me see. They were around 15 seconds behind Hamilton, says Russell Durant. There you go. So that's why most other people had much more warning and were able to deal with it, which throws extra confusion onto the fact that Giovinazzi didn't manage to make that call. So there we go. What if Hamilton just drove through the pit lane if they called it late? It doesn't matter because the point of closing the pit lane is to keep the marshals safe. And that's the reason that the penalty is seemingly so severe. A 10-second stop and go is the biggest penalty you can get without being disqualified. There's nothing else left in the rule book. But it's there for a very good reason, because if you're closing the pit lane entry, you're doing it to keep people, marshals safe, to keep somebody safe. So if a car comes tearing into the pit lane, you are therefore jeopardising the safety of those people. Now, as it happened, when Lewis actually came in, the marshals weren't really in a dangerous situation. It didn't cause a dangerous situation, but it's not the point. The pit lane was closed and that's the penalty. So that's it, end of. So there we go. Safety is why the signal should be a lot more clear, says Alpha Maze. Well, I mean, we could make it more clear, but it's actually very clear. Every team got a notification, the same notification or the same time as the safety car. They were all aware of the safety car notification on their screens. You know, the driver's not saying, right, safety car. It's not telling the team we've got a safety car. We want to make a pit stop. The team see the notification, safety car, and then they make the call. They got that same notification. It's just that when safety car flashed up, they all got heads down into the strategy and missed whatever else. And that's the mistake. So yes, we could do things differently. Yes, if we want to, we could put a light somewhere on the driver's dashboard that immediately flashes red and says pit lane's closed. We could do that, and maybe we should do that. And maybe we will look at doing that in the future. But actually, there were some very clear measures in place. It's just that that team didn't follow them. I say Hamilton gets a 10-second penalty each race to make races more interesting. Well, look, it did make the race more interesting, didn't it? As Robert Faber there says in his question, for the race's sake, it properly spiced it up. So, I mean, do you want to say anything else on this particular subject? Because hopefully I've clarified the details of this, and it seems really unfair. The one thing I still have a major question over was whether we needed a safety car or a virtual safety car, because the safety car, I think at Martin Brundle, or somebody said it in commentary, felt a bit Hollywood. And as it didn't matter, did it? Because the red flag came afterwards. But I think the whole process was all being done for very good reason, assuming we say we can't roll the car back into that gap, so we have to push it into the pit lane. If we've got to do that, we've got to close it. To keep the marshals safe, and so on and so on and so on, and it all built into this incredible race that kind of filtered on from that. Gasly, of course, had just made a pit stop just before that had happened, and at that point they throw a safety car, and he's thinking that's the worst strategy ever. I've made my pit stop, now everyone else gets essentially a free pit stop under the safety car. Then what happened, and that would have been disastrous for him, but then what happened was pit lane closed, which meant everybody had to close up behind the safety car, including Gasly on his fresh tyres. And then there's no gaps for anyone to drop back into. So when they did open the pit lane, everybody dived in to make their pit stop, apart from Stroll. And Gasly starts falling his way towards the front because everybody tumbles towards the rear because the gaps have all gone to fall back into. So what was a disastrous strategy ended up being a brilliant one. The moment that they closed that pit lane for a couple of laps, and then of course the red flag, and so on and so on. So yeah, luck of the Irish for the Frenchman, says Fletcher Racing. He got lucky, but that's what it takes every now and again. And when you get lucky, you've then still got to capitalise on that and make the most of it. Lance Stroll got incredibly lucky on Sunday with a free pit stop, and maybe that's what we should move on to now. He didn't capitalise on that. Pierre Gasly did, which is absolutely why he deserves that win. So let's move it on to that. Matt Black, I guess I'll ask the obvious question if the red flag tyre changes on Stroll's car should count as the mandatory stop. Well, another huge question over the weekend. So to pick up on your specific question, the rules don't specify a mandatory pit stop. The rules specify the mandatory use of 2 different compounds of tyre, and it's that wording that was the loophole that got Lance Stroll the opportunity. It's happened before. It's not a new rule. It's been there for quite some time. I don't remember when it was introduced, but that is a ruling that's not new. Lance Stroll, it seemed like a crazy decision not to make the pit stop under the safety car. And then when the red flag came out, they lucked into what seemed like the key to the race. They didn't make it stick. Should it have counted as, should he been allowed to do it? Well, if we look at the rules, yes, he can do it, as I say, because he used 2 types of tyre in the race. That satisfies the sporting regulations. Should he be allowed to? Should the rules stay that? Or should we change the wording of the rules? Yes, we should, in my opinion. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I think I probably know them. Because, you know, the red flag essentially means you're restarting the race. And that's why the regulations allow certain work to be done, tyres to be changed, drivers to get out, and all the things that are able to happen. It's essentially starting the race again. It's not a pause in the race, it's a restart. It's how the regulations look at it, which is why you're allowed to do those things. However, you know, I think all of us, from a racing perspective, think that's ridiculous. We shouldn't be allowed to do that. We should have to still mandate that every driver makes at least 1 pit stop. And that, a little change of the wording could easily do that. We could change it from every driver has to use 2 types of compound to saying something like every driver has to make at least 1 pit stop and use 2 types of compound. That's all it would take. And then we wouldn't have this type of problem before again. So that's my opinion. What do you think? Red flag should be part firme conditions. I mean, there's an argument for that, but the trouble is that the red flag means you're essentially starting a new race in terms of regulations. So it's tricky, isn't it? I think there's so many outcomes to this. There's so many changes we could make, and they're all just down to people's preference. I don't mind the way things are. However, I think what we saw yesterday, we could easily just clean up that part of it. That was my opinion on it. If it's a restart, why not go back to the quali grid, says Nathan Hinchcliffe. Yeah, I mean, that's another point, isn't it? I'm talking about it's a restart in terms of the regulations, not in terms of the sporting event, because clearly it isn't. Some drivers already dropped out of the race. So we can't exactly form up the way we were. You know, it's a shorter race. So there's all sorts of things. Some people are carrying damage. And one thing I don't like is the idea of being able to change. I think Mercedes were able to change some of the cooling inlets or outlets on their car to open them up to allow more cooling. Now, I definitely think that's not okay. We saw on the TV pictures them showing Joe Bauer, the technical delegate from the FIA, that the parts they were trying to replace those parts with were weighed the same. You know, they weren't claiming any advantage, but they opened up some of those bodywork areas, which for me shouldn't be allowed, because you've chosen the cooling package that you wanted for this race, thinking you're going to be out front. Yes, you're suffering now because you're not out front, but that's tough luck. You kill the moments when you red flag and change the tyres. Yeah, I think the wording needs to be that every driver needs to make a green flag pit stop. Yeah, can't restart quali because it could be gamed by the teams. Yeah, not sure about that one, but I think Carl McGregor says, hello, Mark, from here at the MTC. Hello, Carl. What are you doing at MTC? Wherever it is, I hope you're having fun, and congratulations on a fantastic race result if you indeed work for McLaren. Can't wait to see those victory shirts coming back out again. I've got mine upstairs, my old orange, the orange victory shirts that we all used to wear. Well, that is coming out. I thought it was coming out on Sunday, but it won't be long before that comes out, and I'll have that on, I promise you. There we go. Stroll's making it easier to ditch Perez. Parc Fermé, and if you want to make changes before the restart from the pit lane like the start of the race. I mean, you could do stuff like that, says Cab C74. So there's loads of ways we could change that rule. I generally don't have a problem with it, aside from the fact that this particular weekend, it meant one driver, through a kind of unusual set of circumstances, lucked into a massive win, if you like, in that sense. And that's what's highlighted a problem here. So a small tweak, I'm sure, could do it. There we go. Let's move it on. And I do want to move it on to perhaps another talking point here, which is quite major. Valtteri Bottas. So Giraffe Jane says, thoughts on Bottas's performance yesterday? And surely it can't get any worse for Ferrari. Can it? Good luck. Try to keep the stream to just an hour. Yeah, thanks very much. So Valtteri Bottas. I've been talking about nails going into his coffin on here for a few weeks, haven't I? I mean, his coffin's nailed shut, isn't it? In terms of a championship, I think we know it is. But I think what was highlighted this weekend, I don't want to be too harsh on him because there are a number of circumstances that I'll go into in a moment. I see people already saying fire Bottas. He's just signed a new contract. Valtteri Bottas is just not aggressive enough. He's just not composed enough. He's not consistent enough. And if you compare him to Lewis, which, may be unfair on one hand, but he's his teammate, he's the only other guy in the same car. They had a car more than capable, quite easily capable of winning that race and coming second in that race as well. They should have had a 1-2 without too much trouble. Now, we know about Lewis's problems. Valtteri's problems were almost all brought on himself. And I say that because he fluffed the start, and that's really where it fell apart. And that's not the first time he's done that. That put him out of sync. It put him back into the pack a little bit. You could tell he was flustered. It took him a good few corners to regain some kind of control. And even at that point, we heard him on the radio saying, I've got a puncher, which he didn't have. But that's very typical of a driver who's flustered and out of sorts. They're looking for problems. They're feeling problems that may not even be there. Now, I don't want to be too harsh. There may well have been some problems with Valtteri's car. He had a couple of moments of contact, and we never know how severe that might have impacted his race. But the biggest impact on his race was Valtteri himself, falling back into the pack, and then he had a car that, because he was in the pack and not out in clear air at the front, was overheating, and then he was hamstrung. He could not make headway. But we saw his teammate dropping way to the back with a 30-second penalty, and still make his way back through the field to just 2 places behind him at the flag. And that, for me, tells you a lot about Lewis Hamilton, but it also probably tells you quite a bit about Valtteri Bottas, at least this weekend. What do you think? Swap Bottas for Gasly, Adam Elliott. Wouldn't that be fun? Pretty sure Bottas' car was terrible, I think you're saying, Chris. Lots of asterisks in there. Well, Bottas' car may well have been more hampered than we saw, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for that. But it wasn't really about, just this weekend and it being a lacklustre performance. We've been saying Valtteri needs to get his elbows out. He needs to do something special if he's got any hope of a championship for some time now, and he hasn't done it. So I don't think it was just about this weekend. Gasly to Mercedes for 2022. Well, he's putting himself in a good place for whatever his future holds, isn't he? Whether it's in the Red Bull family or beyond that, he's putting himself in a really good situation. Bottas for Hulkenberg, Neil Laverty. Interesting. Bottas for Vettel. That's never going to happen. David Bigwood, there's no way, and I've said, I won't go into this, I've said this loads of times, there's no way Vettel is ending up at Mercedes alongside Lewis Hamilton. Absolutely no way. It makes no sense for Vettel because he'd get destroyed, and it makes no sense for Mercedes because he's currently getting destroyed. Why do they want to bring in a driver who's showing even more lacklustre performances than the one they've already got in Valtteri Bottas? And that might sound harsh, but it's reality. Comments on Hamilton's track record. Dino, well, Hamilton's track record, I mean, it speaks for himself. It's an incredible record and only becoming more and more incredible. I think what happened on Sunday, although he was, he didn't finish where we expect him to finish, maybe it even shows another side to Lewis that's able to show that aggression, fight through the field that we haven't seen for a long time, because he's never really had to do that in most races in recent times. I would love to see Russell in E. Russell in E, Formula E. I'd love to see Russell in Mercedes, definitely. Vettel for Williams Team Principal 2021. Now that I would like to see. Gasly to Alpine, Ron Knox. I don't know. Does he want to go alongside Fernando Alonso? I'm not sure. I think let's see what happens with Gasly. I think he's in a great place right now. If he gets another shot at Red Bull, it can go one or two ways, and after that, perhaps he has to make a decision about his future and that Red Bull family. Right. Could Mercedes drop Bottas at the end of the season and get George now that Claire's gone? Well, that's Dylan Wheater. I mean, look, never say never to anything, but both of those two drivers have contracts. Valtteri signed a contract at Mercedes. George has signed a contract at Williams. You can break contracts, but it costs an awful lot of money to do that, and I don't see why anyone would want to do that. Valtteri's not hampering Mercedes championships in any way, is he? He's actually doing the job that Mercedes need him to do, which in most races means he comes second. Or even if he comes third, he's going to come second or third in the championship. The team will absolutely win the World Championship, both World Championships. They don't need any more than that. So Valtteri's doing a good job for Mercedes, just not a good job for himself. Bottas to Jordan. I do love some of your comments. They make me laugh a lot. Here's another one. Grosjean P1 at Mugello. I'm going to talk about Mugello at the end of the chat before we sign off. Anything else on Bottas? I just think that Valtteri Bottas, he needs to get his head straight for me, because he needs to decide what he wants to do, what he's going to do, what he's prepared to do to get what he wants. A little bit like Nico Rosberg did back in 2016. He took a decision to sacrifice everything, whether it was family, home life, friends, everything. He sacrificed a lot to put it all into a full-on assault. And that was one of the things that destabilised Lewis, that ended up getting that championship. And we can criticise that in any way, but that's what he did, and he did it well. Bottas to Minardi. Bottas to GP2. You lot are out of order. Right, let's move it on from Bottas, because it's going to start getting personal. Let's talk about... reverse grid race, I see people saying. I do want to talk about that, but let's talk, perhaps on a similar subject, about qualifying. Frank Manders says, if everyone knows that all cars go out in the last minute in quali and the risk involved of tangling is big, why don't some teams go out 1 minute earlier to be able to get a decent time in Q1? And that is a very valid point. The reason that they don't do it, obviously, I think we all know this, is that the tow at Monza specifically is worth so much. It can be worth a huge chunk. If everybody timed it right, not if everyone timed it right, but if you time it right, it can catapult you up the grid. So the reward is huge, but as we keep seeing at Monza, the risk is also huge. And Frank, I kind of agree with you. Mercedes didn't do that. Different from Mercedes because they've got so much pace in hand. They don't need the tow. But so many drivers didn't get a lap. And therefore, you've got to say, in those instances, yes, it would have been worth you going out a minute earlier and getting through a clear lap, even if it might have been half a second slower than you otherwise wanted it to be. You would have still beaten all those drivers that were tangling over each other trying to get a lap in the first place. So in hindsight, yes, that was the right thing to do. But Formula One being Formula One, they're always looking for any advantage they can get. And that's a big advantage if you can make it work. For me, what's more likely, or what would have been more beneficial, is for a team to send their two drivers out separately a minute early, so that at least one of those drivers could get a tow, and maybe they switch it round for the second run. But just get away from everybody else and you two just work on your own. That makes some sense. It's difficult to try and perfect, but it makes some sense if you need that tow. But going out at the last minute along with everybody else makes no sense, as we saw for a lot of people. There we go. One lap. Now this is the big talking point that lots of people keep throwing at this argument. 1 lap quali for each driver, says Vedran Pevic. Well, we have done that before, haven't we? I didn't particularly like it. Some people did like it. They do it in Formula E, but I have to say, in Formula E, just this season, we've had exactly the same type of scenario when it's come to the Super Pole, the earlier qualifying session, where they send them out in small groups of 5 or 6 cars, at a time, and still those 5 or 6 cars want to be the last guy on track, and they still tangle over each other. So you could do 1 car at a time. We've done that in the past. I actually really like the qualifying format that we have right now. It's only really a problem at Monza. It might well be a problem at Bahrain's outer circuit when we get there as well. So perhaps we could look at different qualifying formats for certain events, and I'm not against doing that. What do you think of that? Could we mix it up a little bit? Jamie Eames. Oh, Jamie. It was Jamie who I had the long Twitter argument with about Lewis and his penalty, wasn't it? Hi, Jamie. Sorry about that. Quali is getting way too dangerous in pursuit of the toe. Well, in terms of the danger, yes, it was dangerous in terms of we had cars racing wheel to wheel, but is that dangerous? That's what we do on a Sunday. So is that excessively dangerous? I'm not sure it is, because that's what we ask them all to do every Sunday afternoon. What was really dangerous was when they were all backing up, going incredibly slowly on Friday, looking for a gap. That's very dangerous, but we were able to overcome that quite successfully by mandating a maximum lap time that every driver is allowed to do, and therefore you can't just go around incredibly slowly. We can even hone that rule a little bit by a little bit like we do with the VSC, where we actually can mandate a time in each sector, because with a maximum lap time, you can blitz around the early part of the lap and then slow right up in the entry to Parabolica, which we saw a couple of times. That is dangerous and we need to avoid that. But the tangling through each other, they were racing essentially on Saturday afternoon in quali. I don't like it. It was a mess, and it was a mess for all the teams, but it was a mess of their own doing. Bottas to the safety car. Will you lot leave Bottas alone? Right, so where else should we go from here? Does anyone want to say anything else about... Oh, reverse grids. That's where we're going next, wasn't it? Reverse grids. So I heard even Ross Brawn talking today about reverse grids, and that, he's a big fan of it. He tried to get it in this year. The teams couldn't agree, so they had to back it off. It was only due to come in at some races, and what the idea is, you probably know, but it's a sprint race in qualifying to form the grid. So essentially you start that sprint race in reverse championship order. They go out, do a sprint race, so the fastest guys start at the back. If they can get to the front, then they start on pole, but if they can't quite get to the front in this shortened race, we've got a mixed up grid for Sunday. So there's a lot to be said for that, and not just because of what we saw yesterday in the race, a fast car making its way through the field, which is exciting, but actually I think many of you know my views on this. I've done a video on this. My vision for Formula One in the future is I think we should be doing reverse grids, or at least trialling it. Maybe not everywhere, but at some races I think we should give it a go, because fundamentally, if we put the fastest car, and that's what Formula One has, a massive range of really fast cars to relatively slow cars, if we line them up with the fastest one at the front and say, right, off you go when the lights go out, it's no surprise that they just gradually string out the gaps. The fastest car goes through and wins. The guy that was slowest will probably come last. That's basics, isn't it? That's always going to happen. If we put the fastest guy at the back, probably on a Grand Prix, he'll still make his way to the front, but we'll have some excitement on the way, and yeah, we might get them tangling with each other. We might get some of the front runners making mistakes, getting punted off, losing a front wing. Is that the end of the world? It is if you're Mercedes, you don't want it. But if you're doing this for the fans and the excitement, well, isn't it great? I mean, we don't like the idea. We say it's not very Formula One because racing and Formula One has always done qualifying and started races the way we've done it. If back in 1950 we had started the race in reverse order of qualifying, for example, which no one would have batted an eyelid back then because it was the first time, and we'd gone through life with that being the norm, well, it would just be the norm, and actually it would probably be quite exciting. So we raise eyebrows. We think it's how can you do this? This is sacrilege to Formula One, but it's not in Formula One's DNA. I get all of that, but couldn't we just try it? And actually, the rules have changed for next year in the Concord Agreement, the governance of the sport. So actually, Ross Brawn and his team can actually just make that happen without all of the teams agreeing. So I'm pretty sure, at least at some races next year, we will see reverse grid sprint races happening at some Grand Prix, which I'm looking forward to. Fans don't want to see the slow guys win. Well, I don't think they will see the slow guys win. I mean, on any Grand Prix over 2 hours of a Sunday, Lewis will almost always find his way from last place to first place if that's what he had to do, because his car's that much quicker. Obviously, in an ideal world, what we'd love is the pack to close up, be much closer in terms of performance and just get a good race naturally, but we haven't got that, and we're probably not going to get that for some time. Alex Lamas says, reverse grid will make it exciting, but from a sporting point of view, isn't it a bit artificial? Perhaps, but I mean, look, we're already changing the rules next year to allow the fastest teams to have less wind tunnel and CFD research time than the slowest teams. So we're already doing something artificial, if you like, to close the field up. We're giving an advantage to the slower teams. So why is it any different? Yes, it's a more extreme version, but that's the way Formula One has had to start looking, because the racing's too predictable at the end of the day, and we're doing Formula One racing to entertain people. That's what it's all about. People have to watch this sport. If people don't watch, nobody gets involved. Sponsors don't get involved. TV companies don't. And essentially the whole business model falls apart. So at the heart of all of this, we have to entertain people. And if we give the teams a challenge, like saying, reverse grids, they will mount that challenge. They'll take it on and they'll design a car that can fight through the field, unlike what Mercedes have right now. And perhaps it would all just be better. Anyway, I'd love to see it. I'm not saying it's an absolute winner. I'd say, why not? Let's try it. So let's see. The fastest guy starting in front is also artificial. Well, it's just the way it's always been done. Oh, thoughts on Ocon team radio, says Edu. Interesting, wasn't it? Did you hear it at the end of the race? Esteban Ocon complaining essentially at his strategy. He was probably justified in doing that because they messed it up. They put him on the soft tyre. Like the Alfa Romeos did, which was clearly the wrong tyre to go on. With Ocon, though, the reason they put him on the soft tyre was that their medium tyre, which was clearly the preferred tyre for that second half of the Grand Prix, wasn't warmed up. They hadn't put the blankets on, thinking they weren't going to need them anymore, or they'd switched the blankets off, thinking they weren't going to need them anymore. Got caught out with a red flag, didn't have any tyres that were within the range of being usable. They were too cold, and so the only ones available were the softs, and that's why he had to go. And he was so frustrated because with a race like that, a chaotic race, it's a massive opportunity for people like the Renaults, Ocon, Ricciardo, all of those guys. So he was angry. But Cyril Abiteboul came on the radio and in no uncertain terms told him to shut up and not have this conversation over the radio. He did not want any negative feedback coming across those radio channels that he knew would be broadcast to the world. So interesting. If they don't like a bit of negative feedback on the radio, they're going to have a shock when Fernando turns up next year. Right, thoughts on, a couple of minutes to go. Thoughts on the Williams family leaving René Bruel. I mean, amazing. And let's take a moment to just give some respect to them, because amazing achievement, incredible achievement for that family in this sport. And I know that in recent years, Claire's got a bit of stick because the team has suffered in terms of performances. They've tailed away. And yeah, she's probably made some decisions that with hindsight could have been done better. But the fundamental truth is the state of play of Formula One is what has led to Williams' demise. The fact they've had to sell the team is simply a result of the way that Formula One is today. You cannot compete as an independent family-run team anymore when everybody else is being run by huge corporations and multinational manufacturers. You just can't do it. You can't compete on the same level, and your performance reflects that. So they've done the right thing for the longevity of the team. I'm sure they've done the right thing for themselves. They will have thought about it a long time. It must have been a hard decision. But yeah, we've got to all take our hats off because they have brought us some incredible memories, some incredible cars, and that's one of the things I really appreciate. Some of the technology that's come from Williams has been astounding. And of course, they've brought us some incredible drivers. Frank has given a lot of drivers the opportunity to come into Formula One, and some of those drivers have gone on to be some of the biggest names in the sport that we now know as household names. And if it wasn't for Frank taking a punt on some of those, maybe we'd never seen them. So they've achieved incredible things. The success, apart from anything else, the success that Williams achieved, unbelievable. And I think it's a real shame to see them go. It's a real shame that as I say, the state of Formula One has meant they can no longer survive. That's a poor indictment on the state of Formula One to some extent. It's a shame they've had to go just before the 2022 regs come in, and these changes with budget caps and more equitable split of the prize money, because it felt like that might be the thing that might allow them to hang on, but I think it's come too late, and 2020 on top of the previous years that have gone has just crippled them, and they've had to walk away. So much love for Williams. I think everybody has much love for Frank and for Claire, and I hope that it ends up being a good decision for them. Are they changing the name too? No, it's going to stay as Williams. A lot of people ask me, have Williams Advanced Engineering gone as part of that sale? Well, actually, Williams Advanced Engineering was sold last year, so that had already been sold, apart from a minority stake in that company, which was owned by the Williams Grand Prix Holdings company that's now just been sold to Dorilton Capital. So Dorilton have bought the F1 team and all the heritage department and everything that goes with that, along with a minority stake in the advanced engineering business. But essentially that company had already gone. Right, we are rapidly approaching 10 o'clock. So thank you for all those comments. I want to finish in fact, let's very quickly do this one. Hold on. Ash says, how good will McLaren be next year with a Merc bolted in the back? I'm hoping they're going to be great, but big question mark over the fact they've got to bolt a Merc into a chassis that wasn't designed for Merc. They'll be using their tokens up to do that, which means they can't develop other areas. And we'll have to see how the packaging of that Merc fits with the aerodynamics of the current car. So not a guaranteed, but I do think long term it's a great move. They might get lucky next year and it might all just work. But actually, I think with Daniel coming as well, that team is on a trajectory like that, and I can't wait. So thank you for that question. And finally, let's talk about Mugello. Next weekend, we go to Mugello. Almost embarrassingly, it's Ferrari's 1000th Grand Prix. It was supposed to be a big celebration. They are, in respect of that celebration, coming up with a very special one-off livery, commemorative livery, celebratory livery. As a massive change, they're going to paint their car red. They're going to paint their car a different shade of red for next weekend. But I don't think there's going to be too many celebrations for them. It may not be as bad as this week. Take a look at the circuit. It's a beautiful place. The last time I was there with a Formula One car, we were testing. I'm going to try and do a Tales from the Treehouse on it this week because I think it's quite apt given that it's Mugello. But we went there. I'll come back to that picture in a moment. We went to Mugello off an invite from Ferrari, bearing in mind they were our biggest rivals at the time, McLaren and Ferrari, and they were encouraging people to come and test there. So they said, right, come along, you can come and test for free to check it out. But we were so untrusting of Ferrari at the time and this open invitation that the day before we went, we sent this full team of PIs, believe it or not, to go and scan the garage for listening devices, hidden cameras and anything like that, any kind of hidden technology. They went through with a full-on James Bond style sweep of the place. We didn't find anything. We moved in and we had a really successful test. But there we go, funny story. This is the circuit, as I say. It's a beautiful place down in Tuscany, embedded in a valley in amongst the hills. The sound, certainly it used to when we were last there, reverberates all around that entire valley. It's incredible. But it's also a fantastic circuit. Very fast, lots of sweeping corners, probably a little bit Silverstone-esque, a little bit Suzuka-esque. Probably going to be similar levels of downforce to those circuits. It will probably mean that Ferrari might be less hampered than they have been at the last two races, but I certainly don't think we're going to see miracles from them at their 1000th race. But it will probably come back to bring Red Bull a lot closer to Mercedes. Mercedes probably still have advantage, but a really interesting circuit. There it is. One more look at it. It's a thing of beauty. I've been having my very first laps on it today. You may have seen on my Instagram, on the simulator, on Project Cars 2. It's available if you've got the Ferrari add-on package, which I bought today. Interesting circuit. I will be coming to do a full preview of it later in the week, assuming I can manage to get round there, because I did about 10 laps today, and on every single one of them I ended up in the gravel trap. But it's a good old school circuit. It's got gravel traps, which I like. So lots to talk about with that. Thank you very much. No overtaking at Mugello, says Troy Donaldson. That's one good point. It's so fast, but it's also narrow. Overtaking could be tricky. Qualifying, though, should be spectacular. Right, thank you very, very much once again to all of you. Really, really appreciate it. All of your input, all of your comments, all of your questions, all of your time. Thank you so much. I'll be back later this week, as I say, with a preview to Mugello. We'll try and do a bit more of an engineering preview to that again, and maybe some other stuff along the way. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you'd like anything specific, explaining, covering, describing, any experiments you'd like me to do. I'd love to do whatever you want, so let me know. And I'll be back very soon. So in the meantime, folks, have a great one. Enjoy your week, and I'll see you later. Ta-da.